Let's see here. Is sparkling water bad for health? Is it good for acid-base balance to improve alkalosis? Look, sparkling water is not something you should drink more than regular water, depending on the source of the sparkling water, because that matters too. But, you know, sparkling water is, you know, a lot of people, it can irritate the gastric lining. And if you've already got irritation in your gastric lining, sparkling water can just kind of exacerbate, keep that exacerbated, or keep it and make it problematic. Let's see here. Is it true excess fat is bad for leaky gut? No. I don't know where that's coming from. But excess fat, first of all, we have to define what that really means. You know, your definition of what you think might be excessive fat might not be my definition. I mean, fat consumption, a lot of people are on keto diets or high-fat diets and low-carb diets, and that's not necessarily something that's going to create a leaky gut. Some people thrive on a higher-fat diet. I mean, the Alaskan Eskimo, the Inuit people are perfect examples of individuals who thrive on a very, very high-fat diet. You know, more than 60, 70, 80, even up to 80% of the diet is fat. As far as supplements for lowering cortisol, I wouldn't say a supplement for lowering cortisol, but to support adrenal function, there are a number of different supplements that can do that, a number of different herbals that can kind of, at work is what are called adaptogens, so they help kind of modulate and help support natural cortisol formation. But even beyond those, the best thing you can do for cortisol, if you've got too much cortisol, is reduce your carbohydrate intake, because cortisol is driven up by excessive sugar. Cortisol is also driven up by lack of sleep. So I'd say before you start taking supplements for cortisol, do those two things first. And then if those two things fail, come back and ask me, and we can do a deeper dive into some of the different adaptogens, herbs, and other supplements for cortisol. Now, you're talking about vitamin support for cortisol. My two favorite things are vitamin C and vitamin B5, and your body needs those anyway. So they're not going to be herbals that have a drug-like effect, which, you know, I'm not necessarily against having a drug-like effect with herbs, but I'm against it as a first criteria for trying to improve or trying to make changes. Linda wants to know, is it possible to be weaned off of NP thyroid, or do you have to be on thyroid meds for life? It depends on the person, Linda. I've seen cases where people have been able to get off their thyroid medication, and they've been told just the opposite of that. I'd say there are a couple different scenarios where thyroid medication is probably going to be necessary for the rest of your life, and one is if you've had your thyroid removed or radiated. In those types of situations where you don't have your own, you know, thyroid gland producing your own thyroid hormone, then probably a great idea to continue to follow up with that prescribing doc and monitor your thyroid and stay on that medication. However, if you dialed in your nutrition and figured out why your thyroid wasn't working in the first place, sometimes what happens to women is their medicine becomes too strong. And so when the thyroid medicine becomes too strong, some of the symptoms to look out for with thyroid medicine being too high, right? So we look for heart palpitations. We can see what are perceived to be like hot flashes or temperature flashes. We'll see anxiety and irritability. We'll see trouble sleeping. Sometimes we see tightness in the throat form because you're going too far in the other direction. Sometimes we'll see dry skin and hair loss, which are also symptoms of not enough thyroid. So pay attention predominantly to anxiety, heart palpitations, hot flashes, trouble sleeping, and agitation, increased agitation. If you're doing diet change, or if you're following something like no grain, no pain, and you're getting better, and you're starting to develop these and you're on a thyroid medication, the best thing to do is follow up with your doc and talk to them about measuring your thyroid and make sure you're not over thyroid medicating, because I see this happen all the time. Once we start dialing it in, we'll see the TSH start to really drop below 0.5. 0.5 is kind of the bottom number for your TSH, your circulating TSH. And if you change your diet, sometimes what happens in your on-thyroid medication is that TSH will drop below 0.5. I've seen it drop down to 0.01 or 0.4, 0.3. Just lower than that 0.5 means your thyroid medication is too strong, that it's time to talk to your doctor about a dose adjustment. But yes, you can get off of it. It is possible. You just have to have the right guidance in order to position yourself to make that transition. And if you don't, I don't recommend doing it on your own. You definitely need to be working with a doctor to do that. Yeah, Case chimes in, nature thyroid or doesn't contain corn or gluten. Insurance usually won't pay for it, but it works well for me. Case, where insurance will cover it for you is if you have gluten sensitivity documented in your records. So, you know, again, if you're on it and insurance isn't covering it and you know you're gluten sensitive and your doctor's documented that, then insurance will cover it because there's the need. So you might talk with your doc about that too. Let's see, how best to take a filling out of the tooth. It can cause problem if it has lead in it. So not so much lead, but mercury. So the amalgams, the older amalgams, the silver amalgams that contain mercury, you know, if you're going to have one of those removed, you know, those can cause hormonal disruption and hormonal abnormalities and contribute to an increased risk for autoimmune disease. Mercury is a neurotoxin. You really want to get with an environmental dentist. You know, so look that term up, environmental dentist. There's a website you can also visit, IAOMT.org. This website lists out different dentists who are properly trained in the removal of mercury fillings, where they can take them out of you without hurting you. Because when you as a dentist, when you start pulling out mercury, you have to understand it's an EPA biohazard. Mercury has to be handled as if it's a biohazard, and so the reason why is it's very dangerous. So if that dentist is just kind of chipping away at that and pulling it out, and you get exposed and you swallow that mercury and you get systemic exposure, they're not damming you properly or running the right types of vapor fans to protect you from the mercury filling, then they could actually end up hurting you. So it's very important that you get with a qualified dentist who's certified in knowing how to remove mercury amalgams while protecting you in the process. Let's see here. Does storing food in plastic bags or having other plastic things in the house also contribute to leaky gut? It's a great question, Donna. I would say don't store your food in plastic bags if you're going to use any kind of heat around it. So like, for example, plastic will outgas. So it's not a great idea to really store in plastic. One of the first things I would recommend anybody who has plastic storage is get glass Tupperware. It's better. You'll have less plastic leakage or less plastic chemicals kind of leaching into your food. But I don't know that I've come across any research studies that says that storing your food in plastic bags all by itself directly increases estrogen. All we know is that increased exposure to plastic-based compounds as they leach into your food is what happens. But when they leach into your food, generally it's a heat issue. Although, so when you heat things up in plastic or eat food that's heated up on plastic, so that's a big taboo, big no-no. Let's see here. Susan says, is this only when there's estrogen dominance, or if there is enough progesterone to balance out estrogen, is there still a risk? No, there's still a risk. Estrogen, estradiol contributes to leaky gut, even when it's being balanced by progesterone. So you've got to be careful. You don't want to be in a state of estrogen dominance. And if it's behaviorally caused, you definitely want to change your behaviors around that. Let's see here. Lorna says, doctor prescribed Premarin. I got a new doctor. I love that. Way to have the courage, Lorna, to buck the docs. A lot of you got to remember that doctors, they should work with you and they shouldn't be dictators to you, not solely. I mean, certainly you want to try to have the ability to have a good relationship where you can trust their expertise, but at the same time, if your hackles on your back are going up and all things are pointing to run away, then don't get paralyzed and don't stay over the fear that you might offend the doctor or upset the doctor because you're not following their order. Generally, you want to have a doctor who works with you and not against your philosophical beliefs around health. Lauren wants to know, is doing a heavy metal detox dangerous if you still have amalgam fillings? I'd say it's probably not dangerous. It's just not effective. If you still got amalgam fillings, there's no point and doing a massive mercury detox, because every time you chew, you're releasing mercury vapors and you're just being re-exposed. And so it's not something I would recommend without having those fillings removed first. But even beyond that, I would say ask your doctor to check to see if you even have a mercury toxicity. Remember, sometimes there's an old saying, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And just because you have a silver amalgam doesn't necessarily mean that it's decaying and breaking down and poisoning you. You should put it on your schedule too at some point in your life, try to get rid of it. But at the same time, you can do a chelation challenge with something called DMSA, and you can help to detect whether or not mercury is even a problem for you. And that might be something you want to do before you have a bunch of dental work, especially those of you who have, 2, 3, 4 or more silver amalgam fillings, because some dentists get really aggressive and want to remove a bunch of them at the same time, which can also lead to exacerbation and danger. Kath says, what do you recommend for managing hot flashes and considering coming off of HRT? It depends. If you come off of HRT and if you're doing something like no grain, no pain, that might be all you need. So a lot of times I've seen women who, their grain consumption, their gluten exposure was creating the symptoms around their menopause, like hot flashes and hormonal imbalance. So changing their diet sometimes was enough, and they could come off of their hormone replacement therapies and not have to worry about the exacerbation of hot flashes. So that would be step one, in my opinion, would be lifestyle change first, diet change first. Now, beyond that, there are certain botanicals that have been known to be helpful for women struggling with hot flashes as well. There are things like, for example, Vitex agnus castus, which is an herb that helps to kind of, it acts as what's known, it's called an adaptogen. So an adaptogen, meaning if your estrogen is too high, it competes with your estrogen to kind of reduce the estrogen's effect, your own estrogen's effect. If your estrogen's too low, it acts as a mild estrogen, so it helps to bring an estrogenic activity to your body. So that's why it's called an adaptogen, because whether your estrogen's high or low, it kind of helps you adapt more toward the middle, so to speak. So estrogenic adaptogens, Vitex is a good one to start with. Some women also find products like DIM very helpful. DIM is another product that can help you properly metabolize estrogen. But again, before I would go jumping into the whole realm of adaptogens and herbals, just like with what I was talking about earlier with adrenals, I would recommend first doing diet and lifestyle change. Let's see here. Yeah, so Mary Lou says, I just had this Sotapel pellet for bioidentical hormone therapy inserted. I have Hashimoto's and Sjogren's. Is this a bad thing for me? It may be, it may not be. It's hard to say, Mary Lou. First and foremost, I don't like pellets, and one of the reasons why is you can't control the dose. So I say if you've never had a pellet before and then you get a pellet, if the dose is too strong, you could actually create problems, and because that thing takes about 3 months to dissipate, you're now stuck with that pellet. So pellets are not something I generally tend to recommend. I've seen a lot of doctors try to push pellets. I much prefer to see a woman on some type of oral or cream-based estrogen or any hormone for that matter, because you can control the dose. You can adjust it up or down based on your responses. I would just simply say if you've got the pellet in, you just make sure your doctor, make sure you get with your doctor and he's measuring or she's measuring your hormones as you're going through this process to see what that pellet actually is doing biochemically speaking. Let's see. What does it mean when women grow hair on their chin? My friend has that, and we don't know why. Yeah, so hair on the chin is a kind of a, there's a name for that. It's called hirsutism. But hair on the chin, one of the most common problems with chin hair. So if you're a woman, you've got chin hair, and it's dark chin hair, and it's thick. And now I'm not talking about a hair. Occasionally you get a dark hair. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, if you didn't shave, you'd have a problem type chin hair. And this is oftentimes linked to PCOS. polycystic ovarian syndrome. So, again, a cyst on the ovaries will contribute to blood sugar dysregulation, so blood sugar problems, which then subsequently lead to hormone issues that promote improper metabolism of your sex steroids, and so an increased testosterone-like effect can be seen in these women, and it can cause hair growth, a lowering of the voice, those types of symptoms, hair growth on the chin or in other undesired places that would typically not happen for a female. But again, creating almost like male sexual characteristics in a female linked to PCOS. Now, just so you know this, PCOS is autoimmune. It's a form of autoimmune disease, right? And it's also sometimes referred to as diabetes of the ovaries. So if you've got chin hair and you've got a history of PCOS and you're not looking at carbohydrates and blood sugar and why that might be abnormal, then you're missing the boat completely. This is why a lot of women, when they get a diagnosis of PCOS, a lot of times doctors will want to give them, again, estradiol, right? And so estradiol increases the risk of developing leaky gut, which increases autoimmune disease, which PCOS is. So my opinion, it's probably not the smartest move to make. A lot of doctors also, though, too, because this is a form of diabetes on the ovaries, will give a drug called metformin, which helps to sensitize cells to insulin, and so it can help with blood sugar control. But the problem with giving metformin as a drug is metformin causes folate deficiency. Folate is a B vitamin. Any of you ever heard of MTHFR, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, or the mutations associated with those? When you take a drug like a metformin and it causes you to lose your folate, and if you have a gene mutation for MTHFR, it can actually exacerbate the problem. And you should also know that estrogen causes folate deficiency as well. Now, I'm not talking about your own natural estrogen. I'm talking about prescription-based medication that you're taking can deplete folate. So, again, this is one of the problems with estrogen, giving it, just handing it out haphazardly, which is what a lot of doctors do, at least in my opinion, is they hand it out without cause for concern about the nutritional side effects or consequences. You should know that estrogens cause nutritional deficiency. Again, we're not talking about your own natural estrogen. We're talking about prescription estrogen. So I mentioned earlier B2, B3, B6, folate, vitamin B12. All those things can become more deficient as a result of using estrogen-based drugs. And so again, coming back up here, how do we control blood sugar? One of the biggest ways we control blood sugar is through B vitamins. So if you're taking this drug to control this and you're depleting your B vitamins in the process, you're making your blood sugar worse. And then if you add metformin to that, you're making your B vitamin folate worse. But metformin also causes deficiency of B12 and CoQ10. And CoQ10 deficiency causes mitochondrial dysfunction, which can lower your energy, cause you to start developing muscle pain and aches and neuropathy. And again, we end up in a very bad place. So we don't have time to get into the complete biochemistry of that, but it was a good question. Let's see here. Let's see, Marianne, what about the bioidentical hormones that are compounded to your body? They're not that great for you? Look, I don't think so. It's my, I have a different opinion probably than a lot of doctors that prescribe hormones. I think if you're a woman considering going on estrogen therapy because of quality of life issues, so like if you are going through, menopause or perimenopause, and the hot flashes are so severe you can't sleep, and so your sleep quality is so poor you can't function, that might be cause for looking at this. But again, if you haven't changed your diet and your lifestyle first, so estrogen, my point is, estrogen therapy shouldn't be the first thought. Like diet and lifestyle should be the first thought. If that fails to achieve kind of a normalization, right, then now you can get with your doctor to consider bioidentical estrogen-based therapies. They're not always bad 100% of the time. I mean, there are women that, that meet the criteria that, that would be good candidates for that. I think too many doctors, though, are too quick to do it. I just see women come to me, again, all over the world. They come to me and they've been, they went into their doctor didn't even test them. Right? They just said, oh, your symptoms sound like estrogen. We need to just put you on estrogen. And they say, oh, it's bioidentical, so it won't hurt you. And it's like a marketing term. Bioidentical doesn't mean that it's not a powerful drug that won't affect you also in negative ways. And so it becomes a quality of life issue. But again, how do we improve our quality of life? We improve our quality of life through diet, through exercise, through lifestyle. If those things fail, now we have a potential where medicine might be a good choice for you. And again, nobody can make that decision for you. I would just say don't make it in haste, because if people make it in haste or let their doctors make it in haste, that we kind of create this cascade of problems that we don't want to necessarily create. So, and remember, if you do go on an estrogen, it's extremely important that you ask your doctor to monitor your estrogen levels, right? To keep tabs, not just measure. So when they're measuring, there are different ways to measure hormones. If we're talking about estrogen, estradiol, also known as E2, but there's E1 and there's E3. So these are kind of the three primary forms of estrogen. E1 is estrone, E2 is estradiol, and E3 is estriol. Okay, so those should be measured, as well as total estrogen. And a lot of doctors, what they'll measure is, the only thing they'll measure is total estrogen. They won't tease out E1, E2, and E3, so you don't really know what's happening with those subtypes. But there's one other thing that your doctor should probably measure, and that's a compound called SHBG. That stands for sex hormone binding globulin. And the reason why is if your SHBG, if it's too high, it can bind to your estrogen and make it not work as well. And so one of the ways to lower SHBG, if you have a high SHBG, is to exercise. Exercise helps. It's one of the best ways to actually lower sex hormone binding globulin. And if you aren't exercising appropriately and you know it, right, and you're struggling and you've got hormone symptoms, this is why exercise becomes so important, and that's one of its side effects in terms of benefiting you. Let's see here. Does topical estrogen cause the same issue? Clarify for me, Anita, when you say the same issue. If you're talking about the same issue that we're talking about here, yes, it can. Topical estrogen can as well. Remember, your skin's an organ, it absorbs, and that absorption goes from your skin to your bloodstream. Let's see. Hina wants to know, what about phytoestrogens? Are they good for us? Depends. Some of you can benefit from plant-based estrogens. There are different phytoestrogens. Soy is a common source for phytoestrogens. And in some products where we don't want to use, let's say a woman doesn't necessarily want to use prescription drug, so instead she's using different phytoestrogens, plant-based compounds that have estrogenic activity as a substitute for taking a prescription drug estrogen to see if she gets a benefit. That's an option. So phytoestrogens can be okay. It's just, if you're talking about, are you going to take high doses of phytoestrogens in concentrated forms, you still want to treat it, with a degree of well, let's just say caution. Not that they're super dangerous, but again, we don't want to create an imbalance. We don't want to solve an imbalance by creating a new imbalance. And that's the problem in medicine today. Newsflash, for those of you who haven't heard this before, but, medicine is designed to chemically manipulate you by giving you some type of drug, right, that will manipulate your biochemistry so that it changes how you express the symptoms that you're feeling. So like if you go to the doctor and say, I have pain, if you go to the doctor and say, I have breast tenderness, if you go to the doctor and say, I keep getting urinary tract infections, if you go to the doctor and say, I'm having hot flashes, or I'm low on energy, or my libido is no good, usually what happens? They write you a prescription for a chemical. That chemical artificially manipulates your symptoms, but it doesn't fix why your problem existed in the first place. Fundamentally speaking, you should always look for the reason why, not for what to call it and what drug to give it. And it's the same thing with plant medicines. Look, plant medicines are very powerful. Most of our drugs are made from plant medicines. So you have to have a high degree of respect for them, which is why I'm a big fan of testing. I'm a big fan of trying to get to the bottom of the underlying reason as to why the problem exists, as opposed to just medicating it and masking the symptoms, because that gives you a false, what I call pseudo security, like a false security. And it's really, in my opinion, it's pseudo compassion as well, meaning doctors will say, I'm just being compassionate, I want you to feel better. But I would say that's not true compassion. True compassion is truth, right? Truth is compassion, and truth is a hard pill to swallow sometimes, right? Sometimes we don't want to hear the message that we're not exercising enough, or that we need to change our diet, right? But as a doctor, it doesn't serve you to lie to you. It doesn't serve to come at you with pseudo-compassion and manipulate your chemistry so you feel better without telling you why you don't feel bad in the first place. It serves to enslave you. And I say enslave, meaning it enslaves you. It makes you a slave to needing that medicine for the rest of your life to appease your symptoms. And to me, that doesn't cut it. That doesn't cut the mustard. It's not a good approach. It just leads to dependency on drugs for the rest of your life. Sharon wants to know, can autoimmunity also result in rashes? Sure, it can. There's eczema, there's psoriatic arthritis, there's hives, there's a number of different skin manifestations of autoimmune disease that can occur. And so, yeah, absolutely, it can manifest as rashes. Do you get an increase in leaky gut even when the estrogen is bioidentical? Yes, Marie. You have to remember that even though it's bioidentical, you're taking it in doses that is not what your body would typically produce, possibly. And so you're getting these spurt doses that you're using if you're using a drug. Estrogen has that effect. Again, remember what I said earlier. Autoimmune disease affects women more than men. Okay, and one of the big reasons why is estrogen. And one of the big reasons why estrogen, because estrogen can contribute to leaky gut, and women are more prone to estrogen dominance problems because of our modern environments. So yes, even bioidentical hormones can increase the risk for developing these very same issues. So don't fall into the blind spot of just because it's bioidentical, it's somehow better and it doesn't have side effects. Remember, always respect any drug, whether it's bioidentical or whether it's not. Let's see, can hormone imbalances cause a 30-pound increase in a 2-month period? Yeah, absolutely. Hormone imbalances and hormone changes are notorious for creating weight problems, Kathy. And I would say, especially if you're under a lot of stress in this last few months, with the virus, with the riots and everything else that's going on, a lot of people are under a lot of tremendous stress. And so their cortisol levels are being driven up, and cortisol causes you to have blood sugar excess, which, when your blood sugar goes up in your bloodstream, what that does is it makes everything sticky. Your heart has to work harder. But in addition to that, that blood sugar elevation is going to increase the triglyceride production. Your body takes excessive glucose and turns it into fat and then stores that fat as kind of conserved energy, right? And so you can gain a lot of weight in that way, but you can also gain a lot of weight with cortisol increase and stress as a result of water retention, because your adrenal glands also regulate your water balance. Let's see. Yeah, Loretta says, I was diagnosed or prescribed estrogen for osteoporosis. Do you think it's a good reason to take an estrogen progesterone supplement? Look, I think that's a question that probably is better answered with your doctor, who has a really deep history on who you are and what's going on, what other cofactors or lifestyle variables are going on within your life. That being said, I don't, me personally, I have seen lots of women who have been on estrogen for bone loss but didn't really need it. So is that a wrong approach that you're taking right now? I don't know. I just don't have enough information to really give you an intelligent answer that wouldn't potentially create a problem for you. Let's see here. Is it possible to bind xenoestrogens and remove them from the body? It is. And the way we do that is with things like DIM. So DIM is going to help metabolize those out, but so too are the B vitamins. It's very important to have adequate magnesium and folate and B12 to properly metabolize estrogens, including xenoestrogens, out of the body. It's also very critical that your glutathione systems in your liver are functioning really well. And glutathione, in order, some people are glutathione deficit, and there are a couple of different amino acids that play a role in producing glutathione, glutamine, and cysteine being two primary ones that I see people being deficient in quite a bit. But yes, it is possible to do that. Okay, so if you have no ovaries, should you be on bioidentical hormones? If you don't have any ovaries at all, this would be one of those things where you work with your doctor, you test, and you come to that decision as that doctor's being investigative, like helping you work with your diet, helping you work with your nutrition, but also testing to see, is that effective enough, or do you need additional support through medication? Okay. What causes uterine fibroids and how to shrink them to prevent heavy bleeding. In my experience, GN, probably one of the best things that you can do if you're struggling with a uterine thyroid, fibroid issue is right here. I've seen a number of cases where women went on no grain, no pain diet, and their fibroids also went away with that diet change. So if you're not there in that place of diet, that's the number one thing I could tell you to make an attempt at doing first. And then maybe come back in a few weeks after you're on the diet, and if things aren't getting better, then you could kind of re-ask that question. We're here every Monday at 6 p.m. Okay, I think we've got more questions, but we got no time. So, look, I hope this was extremely helpful for you. I know it's a topic that very few doctors are going to breach or even attempt to attack or attempt to communicate about, because so many women are put on that estrogen therapy. So again, if you know somebody who might benefit from this, hit that share button, copy that URL above and paste and send it to them, text it to them, email it to them, and let's get them the help that they need. Remember, the goal here is we're trying to save 100 million lives. As I said earlier, I'm going to put the links below to those research studies. So if you are having a follow-up conversation with your doc and you want to have some valid studies you can print out and take in and kind of facilitate that conversation, we'll put that in the comments section in the description below the video here. Until next week, hope you guys have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Monday night, same time. Take care. Hey, if you've got a functional medicine or health question that you'd like me to answer for you, make sure you send me an email, glutenology@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to create a video answer just for you. Have a great day.